For centuries, humanity was believed to be gone, nothing more than a dark chapter in the galaxy's past. The last whispers of Earth's great wars had faded long ago, leaving only memories of a species that destroyed itself with ambition and pride. The Galactic Empire had long since taken its place as the ruler of the stars, unchallenged and unthreatened. They had eradicated every trace of the human colonies, leaving the galaxy to grow in peace under their control. The humans were no more, their name erased from history, but something stirred in the shadows. In the heart of the Empire's most secure sector, far beyond the reach of the Imperial fleet's most advanced sensors, something tore through space itself. It wasn't a ship slipping through a wormhole, nor a fleet entering with the hum of hyperdrive engines. No, this was different. This was an arrival that was felt, not heard. One moment the skies over the glittering planet of Valara were calm, and the next, the impossible happened. A massive warship, unlike any the Empire had ever seen, appeared without warning. It was a relic, ancient and blackened from countless battles, but it radiated power. The vessel's design was unlike any recorded in the Empire's archives. No insignia, no markings, just an imposing, silent behemoth drifting through the stars as if it belonged there, waiting to be noticed. It was a ship from another era, a time forgotten by the galaxy, yet there it was, undetectable until it was too late. The Empire had failed to notice its approach. By the time the first alert reached Imperial Command, the warship was already within range of Valara's planetary defenses. Sirens screamed as the planet's satellites finally caught a glimpse of the dark figure above, but the damage was already done. At the Imperial Citadel, Emperor Crix stood frozen, his scales turning a deep shade of red. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, flickered with something he had not felt in years: fear. "What is that?" he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. His closest advisors scrambled to respond, their minds racing as they tried to make sense of the impossible. "Your Excellency, it's a human vessel," one of his officers stammered. Crix's claws dug into the stone of his throne. "Humanity is extinct," he snarled, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "It can't be." But even as he spoke, the warship made its move. It didn't fire its weapons. It didn't engage the fleet. Instead, it moved with the grace of a predator, silent and deliberate, as though it had all the time in the galaxy. The Imperial fleet, paralyzed with confusion, didn't know whether to respond with force or retreat into the safety of their fortified positions. But hesitation would be their undoing. A pulse like the strike of a serpent's tongue erupted from the ship. The impact was invisible, faster than light, and before anyone could comprehend what had happened, 4 of the Empire's most powerful cruisers were gone. No explosion, no wreckage. They were simply erased, reduced to nothingness, as though they had never existed. Across the Empire, panic set in. The reality of the situation hit harder than any weapon. An ancient force, a forgotten enemy, had returned. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. In the corridors of power, from the Emperor's citadel to the most remote military outpost, there was one question on everyone's mind. What did this mean? The communications networks erupted into chaos. Emergency orders flooded across the stars. Civilian ships were grounded. Military units scrambled to prepare for an unknown threat. But despite all their efforts, the warship remained still, silent, patient, as though it were watching and waiting for something. The Imperial fleet, once so confident in its might, had been reduced to a quivering shadow of its former self, helpless before a power it could not understand. In the heart of the Imperial command, Emperor Crix's mind raced. This was not an invasion. This was something far worse. This was a message, a reminder. and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity hadn't died. They had merely been waiting for the right moment to rise once again. The moment stretched into eternity. No one dared to make a move, as if the very air had turned to lead, heavy with the knowledge of what was unfolding. The warship, once a phantom of ancient stories, now loomed over Valara like a dark omen. It was not attacking, not advancing, but its mere presence was enough to send tremors through the heart of the Empire. The silence it carried was deafening, more terrifying than any roar of weaponry could have been. Emperor Crix's mind churned as he sat atop his throne, claws digging deeper into the arms of his seat. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavier than the responsibility of his position or the legacy of the Empire itself. His advisors, once so sure of their dominance, now quivered in his shadow. The calm confidence that had ruled the Empire for centuries was shattered in an instant. A warship, a relic from a forgotten species, had appeared as if out of thin air, and with it, a question that no one in the Empire was prepared to answer. How could they fight something they did not understand? For years, the Empire had believed the humans were nothing more than a cautionary tale. Their reckless violence, their self-destructive wars, everything that had made Earth's legacy one of ruin, had been wiped from the galaxy. It was an inconvenient truth they had buried, a chapter they didn't need to read again. Yet here it was, standing before them, not in a blaze of fury, but in cold, silent defiance. Humanity wasn't dead. They hadn't been defeated. They had simply chosen to wait, to observe, to remain hidden while the Empire built its empire on the bones of their past. "This is impossible," Crix muttered again, the words slipping out like a prayer he couldn't bring himself to believe. He clenched his fists as if the act might force the reality of the situation to shift. But there was no denying it. There was no illusion here. The Empire had been caught off guard by a power it hadn't expected to ever face again. The humans had survived, and they were back. Crix stood from his throne, his massive reptilian form casting a shadow over the room. "Summon the fleet, now," he ordered, his voice cold but laced with the tension that could snap at any moment. His eyes flicked to his most trusted advisor, General Vorn, whose grim expression mirrored his own. The general's usually unshakable demeanor had cracked, revealing the fear beneath. Vorn nodded, signaling the rest of the command room into action. As the first reports came in, the magnitude of the situation began to sink in. The human warship had not made any effort to hide its presence. It had simply appeared as if the universe itself had given way to its existence. No technology, no trickery, no illusion. The ship was real, and worse, it was impossibly advanced. No one in the Empire's archives had any records of such technology. No known race had the power to build something like that. How could a species wiped out long ago possess such an artifact of war? The Imperial fleet scrambled, but even the most seasoned officers knew there was nothing they could do. They had no data on the ship's capabilities. Their weapons had been designed with a very different enemy in mind. Their tactics, their technology, their entire arsenal seemed obsolete now. There was no one to lead them, no history to guide them. And as the ship hovered silently above the planet, not a single shot had been fired. It was then that the communications came in. A single encrypted transmission blared across every channel, cutting through the panic and the confusion. It wasn't a message, it was a signal. A single image flashed across every screen in the galaxy, an image that made the blood run cold in every Imperial soldier's veins. A human face, ancient, weathered. It was a face that spoke of years of war and loss, yet it carried a hard, unbroken resolve. The face was not familiar, yet there was something deeply unsettling about it. It was the face of someone who had witnessed the end of an era and lived to tell the tale. Someone who had survived humanity's greatest trials. and beneath the face in the cold, efficient language of the galaxy were 4 words, burned into every screen. We never left. Remember. Those words seemed to echo in the minds of every Imperial citizen, from the highest generals to the lowliest miners. They weren't a threat, not a warning. They were a declaration. The humans had never been gone. They had never died. They had watched. They had waited. And now, they were back. Crix stared at the screen, his mouth dry, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the haunting image of the face. Who was this person, and why now? Why after all these years? He had believed humanity's extinction was a certainty. They had left behind nothing but ruins, the forgotten ashes of a broken world. But this face told a different story. In the dimly lit chamber, a silence fell over the room. The murmurs of his advisors ceased, their words frozen in their throats. Crix's thoughts raced, colliding with each other in a storm of confusion and fear. How could this be? How could they have survived? One of the younger officers, trembling, stepped forward. "Your Excellency, the transmissions, they've stopped. There's no response, no communication. It's as if they're waiting for something." "Waiting for us to make a mistake," General Vorn added, his voice cold and calculating. "We've been caught off guard, and now we have to respond." Crix turned sharply to face his general. "How do we respond to a ghost?" he hissed, frustration edging his words, his claws clenched at his sides, as if the very idea of fighting the unknown enraged him. "What do we even fight with?" "We don't fight," Vorn replied, his voice hard. "We don't know anything about their weapons, about their strength. The only thing we know is that they're not here to talk. We need to make them feel that the Empire is not afraid. We need to show them that we won't be intimidated." Crix's eyes narrowed. He knew Vorn was right, but the fear that had settled deep in his chest was hard to ignore. This wasn't just a threat to the Empire. It was a threat to everything they had built, everything they had come to believe. If humanity was truly back, what else would they be capable of? The fear of the unknown was a far more dangerous weapon than any they could wield. And the human message, those 4 words, reverberated in his mind like a hammer striking the anvil. "We never left, remember?" The weight of history seemed to settle on him like a shroud. The Empire had ruled for centuries, built on the myths and lies of its own making. Now that foundation was crumbling, piece by piece. The very existence of this human warship was proof that their history, their victory, had been hollow. Humanity had never been defeated. They had simply stepped back, watching, waiting, and now the Empire would face them again. But the question that lingered in Crix's mind, like a shadow in the dark, was simple. What did they want? The warship was still silent, still unmoving. It had made its message clear. It wasn't there to fight. Not yet. It was there to remind the Empire of what it had forgotten. The time of the Empire was running out. As the silence stretched on, the tension in the Imperial command room thickened. Every officer, every general, every strategist was searching for a plan, a way to confront the looming threat that hung over them like a dark cloud. Yet no one spoke. The face on the screen had shaken them all to their core, and the message, simple, direct, was still echoing in their minds. "We never left. Remember." Those words were a cold, undeniable reality. They were a proclamation of humanity's endurance, their survival, and their return to the galactic stage after being presumed dead for so long. For the first time in centuries, the Empire, in all its might and glory, found itself at a loss. "Sir, the fleet is awaiting orders." General Vorn's voice cut through the heavy air, but it didn't sound like a question. His words were a simple fact. Every officer in the room knew the Empire had to do something, anything to reassert its control. The galaxy could not be left to question the Empire's strength. Not again. Crix's claws dug into the armrests of his throne, his mind churning with conflicting thoughts. He had never feared an enemy before. Fear, in his position, was a luxury the Empire could not afford. Yet here, in the presence of this human warship, Crix felt something he hadn't in years, something primal, something he had long believed extinct within him. It was the kind of fear that unsettles the bones, the kind of fear that makes even the mightiest rulers question their own authority. "Send the fleet," Crix finally growled, the words harsh on his tongue. His voice was steady, but there was a barely contained fury that danced behind his words. "Activate the planetary defense grid. We will show them what the Empire is capable of." There was no hesitation from his commanders. They all knew what to do, what they had to do. Orders were issued at once, and the Imperial fleet, composed of hundreds of warships, began to move toward Valara. Massive cannons began to power up, their engines humming with barely contained energy, and the planetary defense grid, one of the most advanced in the galaxy, flared to life. Yet, despite the sheer power of the Empire's military might, the warship above them remained unmoving. Its presence was a silent reminder that it didn't need to rush. It didn't need to prove anything, and that, in itself, was more terrifying than any weapon. Inside the command room, the atmosphere was tense as Crix stood tall, the weight of leadership bearing down on him. He had led the Empire to dominance, crushed rivals and rebellions alike. He had seen countless enemies fall before the might of the Empire, but this was different. This was humanity, and humanity was something he had believed had disappeared into the abyss of history. "What do we know about the human fleet?" Crix asked, his voice commanding but strained. "Nothing, Your Excellency," General Vorn replied with a solemn tone. "Their technology is unlike anything in our archives. We've been running scans for hours, but our sensors can't seem to detect anything other than their flagship. It doesn't even register in our systems. It's as if they're manipulating reality itself." "Impossible," Crix muttered. "No one manipulates reality." "Perhaps they do," Vorn said, his voice carrying a chilling thought. "Perhaps they never truly left. If this warship is any indication, they've had centuries to develop technology beyond our reach. They might have learned how to hide, how to remain undetected until the time was right to strike." Crix's eyes narrowed as he considered the possibility. Could they have hidden away for so long, building power in secret while the Empire grew complacent? Could they have waited patiently, watching as the Empire expanded unchecked across the galaxy, biding their time until they were strong enough to rise again? The idea was almost unthinkable, but the evidence was in front of him. "I want every available fleet captain to report in. We need to understand what we're facing," Crix barked, his tone fierce. A new voice cut through the tension. General Mirren, a rising star in the Imperial Army, stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She had been quiet for most of the meeting, but now her eyes were sharp, filled with a sense of urgency. "We need to consider something else," she said, her voice calm yet filled with conviction. "This is not just a tactical threat. This is psychological warfare." Crix turned to her, intrigued despite himself. "Explain yourself." "They want us to act, Your Excellency. Every move we make, every order we give, will only confirm their power. They've already shown us what they can do with a single pulse from their ship. If we fire on them, they'll have the justification they need to respond. If we retreat, it will be seen as weakness. Either way, we're playing into their hands," Mirren said, her voice unwavering. Crix's mind raced. She was right. The humans had already proven they could destroy a portion of the Imperial fleet in an instant. If the Empire struck back, it might escalate the situation beyond repair. But if they did nothing, it would show the galaxy that they were afraid of something they couldn't comprehend. It would embolden humanity, and worse, it would give the galaxy the impression that the Empire had lost its grip on power. He clenched his jaw. So, what do you propose? Do we just wait and see what they do next? Mirren shook her head. We need to understand them. We need to know why they're here. What is it that they want from us? They've made their point by showing their power. Now they're waiting for us to make the next move. We can't react impulsively. We need to learn what they're really after. Crix turned away from her, staring at the warship hanging in the sky above Valara. It was as if the universe itself had shifted. This was not just a military confrontation. This was something far more complex, something that threatened the very foundations of the Empire. The image of the human face flashed in his mind again. The cold, unyielding eyes staring back at him, as if to say, "We're back, and you can't stop us." "Send a diplomatic envoy," Crix said, his voice low but resolute. "We will open a channel. See if we can understand their demands. If we can avoid war, we will." General Vorn raised an eyebrow. "Diplomatic envoy, Your Excellency? To the humans?" "Yes," Crix replied. "They've already shown they can destroy us if they wish. If they're willing to talk, we should at least try to understand what they want. Prepare the envoy, General." Vorn hesitated, but he gave a curt nod. "Understood, Your Excellency." As Crix turned away from the massive view screen showing the silent warship above Valara, a single thought consumed him. Humanity had returned, not as a scattered remnant of a failed species, but as a force that had evolved in the shadows. They had bided their time, they had learned, adapted, and now they were ready to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The Empire had never been more vulnerable. The tension in the command room only grew as the diplomatic envoy was prepared. Crix's decision to open a channel was not one he made lightly. It was a move that could either preserve the Empire's dignity or shatter it completely. The galaxy's greatest power, reduced to sending a diplomatic mission to a species once believed extinct, now faced an enemy they didn't understand. But it wasn't just the military threat that worried Crix. It was the message humanity had sent. That face with its cold, battle-hardened eyes and the chilling words, "We never left." Remember, those words felt like a curse, a reminder of a forgotten past. But there was more to it, something beneath the surface of their silence that seemed to pulse with a hidden purpose. What exactly did the humans want? To crush the Empire? To take revenge for their long-lost colonies? Or was there something deeper, something that went beyond mere vengeance? The human warship, the face, the words, they were not the actions of a mindless conqueror. There was intention behind it all, a plan unfolding in the darkness. General Vorn returned to Crix's side as the preparations for the envoy were underway. "Your Excellency, we've chosen the most seasoned diplomats we have. If there's any chance of reaching them, it's through these men and women." Crix turned his gaze back to the view of the warship above Valara. Its sheer size seemed to consume the sky, casting a long shadow over the planet. The way it hovered there, still unmoving, was as though it was waiting for something, biding its time. It almost felt as if the ship itself was a living being, watching, judging, waiting for the Empire to make its move, and every second that passed without a response only deepened the sense of looming inevitability. "Prepare them well, General," Crix said, his voice strained with the weight of the decision. "But remind them, they are representing the Empire. They are not to show weakness, no matter the circumstances." Vorn bowed, understanding the unspoken command. He had been with Crix through countless campaigns, and he knew his Emperor better than anyone. Crix would never accept anything less than complete control, and he would not tolerate any signs of fear. But even he, for all his experience, knew that this was a new kind of enemy, a force that could not be intimidated by the Empire's might alone. As the diplomatic envoy prepared to leave the citadel, the warship remained eerily still in the sky. The fleet had begun to form around it, a vast and imposing array of ships, positioned in a perfect defensive perimeter, but none of them dared to make the first move. The warship, silent and immovable, held its ground like a sentinel, reminding everyone that it was not there to start a war. No, it was there to claim what it believed was its rightful place in the galaxy. The envoy, led by Ambassador Tarian, one of the Empire's most respected diplomats, boarded a shuttle bound for the warship. His team of negotiators and translators sat with grim faces, their hands trembling slightly as the shuttle moved into position. It wasn't fear they felt, not exactly, but something close to it. There was no known precedent for dealing with this situation. They were about to speak with a species that had been presumed extinct for centuries, and the only message they had received was a warning. The human face, the 4 words, "We never left, remember." "What do you think they want?" asked one of the translators, his voice soft and unsure. Tarian didn't answer at first. He just stared at the black hull of the warship, his thoughts heavy with the gravity of their mission. What could they want? Peace? Revenge? Or something else entirely? He had no answers. No one did. "We'll find out soon enough," Tarian said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped him. The shuttle approached the warship, its massive size becoming even more intimidating up close. As they got within range, a strange thing happened. The warship, which had been motionless for hours, began to respond. Slowly, methodically, it started to shift. Not with the graceful movement of a modern ship, but with the deliberate slowness of a creature that had all the time in the universe. It seemed to glide through space as if it were part of the very fabric of reality itself, distorting the air around it with an eerie hum that sent chills down the spines of everyone aboard the shuttle. "Steady," Tarian whispered to his crew, trying to mask the nervousness in his own voice. They all knew that they were about to make history. Whether it would be written in peace or war was yet to be determined. The shuttle hovered in place, its thrusters kicking on just enough to keep them steady as they waited for the signal from the warship. The seconds dragged on, heavy with anticipation. Finally, a faint, distorted signal came through their comms, a broken frequency that crackled and hissed before settling into something almost comprehensible. A voice, low, gravelly, but unmistakably human, cut through the static. It was a voice that sounded both ancient and timeless, as though it had traveled across countless years to reach them. The words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air. "Welcome, Empire. We've been waiting." Tarian's heart raced in his chest. The voice was clear, commanding, but there was something unsettling about it. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a calm certainty that sent a wave of unease through the entire crew. Whoever was speaking, they weren't afraid of the Empire. They were simply waiting. "Who are you?" Tarian asked, his voice steady despite the unease building inside him. "What do you want?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence was deafening, stretching out longer than was comfortable. Then the voice returned, this time softer, almost amused. "We don't want anything from you, Ambassador," the voice replied. "We've waited long enough. What we want is for you to remember." Tarian's brow furrowed in confusion. "Remember what?" The voice didn't answer immediately, but the tension in the air grew thick. It was as if the voice was measuring them, gauging their reactions. And then, finally, the words came. "You'll remember everything soon enough. The warship is just the beginning." Back on Valara, the Imperial fleet watched in silence, the tension palpable. They had sent their emissary, hoping for a peaceful resolution, but there was no certainty. The warship remained still in the sky, its ominous presence hovering over the planet like a shadow waiting to fall. Crix stood in the Citadel's command room, staring out over the city below. His mind raced. What did the humans want? Why had they waited so long? And most importantly, what would they do if the Empire refused to meet their demands? The thought weighed heavily on him. There was no answer to these questions. Not yet, anyway. All he had were the unsettling words from the warship. "We've been waiting." A chilling thought. The question was not just what humanity wanted. It was what had they been preparing for all these years. The Empire had never been more vulnerable. The diplomatic mission continued, but Crix knew that no matter what happened, the Empire could never be the same again. It was only a matter of time before the galaxy was forced to confront the truth. The waiting was unbearable. Each minute that ticked by in the control room felt like a lifetime. Crix's sharp eyes never left the view of the warship hovering above Valara. The diplomats had made contact, but the conversation was shrouded in cryptic words and unsettling silence. It was clear that the humans were not interested in immediate conflict, but they were certainly not interested in peace in the conventional sense. The ambiguity of their demands, or perhaps their refusal to make demands at all, only deepened the uncertainty that had settled over the Empire. A soft chime broke the stillness, and Crix's calm, calculating demeanor slipped for a split second. His claws flexed as he turned toward the console that flickered to life in front of him. It was a transmission from the diplomatic shuttle. "Your Excellency," General Vorn's voice came through, strained and urgent. "The envoy is requesting immediate extraction. They are in a standoff with the humans." Crix's heart skipped a beat. A standoff, that could mean anything. Was it an act of aggression, or was the Empire being toyed with? His mind raced. No matter what it was, it could not be allowed to go on for much longer. The Empire could not appear weak, but it also could not afford to escalate into an all-out war. Not with the humans. Not with a force that had been waiting for centuries in the dark. "Send them our response," Crix commanded, his voice smooth but with an underlying edge. "We won't play games. If they refuse our peace, we will remind them who commands the galaxy." General Vorn hesitated, but only for a moment. "As you wish, Your Excellency." The Emperor stood still, his tail twitching in agitation as he stared at the grand view of Valara's capital city below. Despite the enormous fleet arrayed above them, despite the power of their weapons, the warship, silent and patient, continued to loom over the planet. It was almost as if it were waiting for the right moment, not to strike, but to speak, and that unnerved Crix more than anything. If the humans wanted to start a war, they would have done it already. They were not acting like invaders, they were acting like a people who had been wronged for a long time and were now simply making their presence known. A voice from the communication panel broke through the Emperor's thoughts. "We have confirmation, Your Excellency. The shuttle is returning to the fleet. However, the envoy has been shaken. They claim that the human ship sent a message." Crix narrowed his eyes. A message. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne, a sign of mounting frustration. "What message?" The officer hesitated. They claim the ship transmitted a vision, an image of humanity's history, the rise of the Empire, the destruction of human colonies, the eradication of their people. They say it was a warning, a reminder of what the Empire has done. Crix's blood ran cold. The vision of humanity's history. That was the message. What could the humans want by dredging up the past? The Empire had already won, had already eradicated the humans. There was nothing left for them to reclaim. Or so Crix had believed. "Explain this." Crix snapped, his patience thin. What exactly did they show? The officer's voice trembled slightly. The diplomat said the vision was fragmented but clear enough to understand. They were shown footage of Earth, the planet in ruins, the last colonies burning, the final fall of humanity. But there was something else. The last image was a symbol, an emblem on a flag, something they say was the symbol of humanity's resistance. Crix's eyes narrowed further. A flag. What is this symbol? Why was it shown to them? Unfortunately, Your Excellency, the diplomats couldn't decipher it. They weren't prepared for this, the officer said, his voice trailing off in the face of Crix's obvious anger. But we have been able to isolate the frequencies. There's something peculiar about them. The energy signature is unfamiliar. Crix rubbed his eyes as though trying to push the thoughts from his mind. The vision of Earth, the humans' final moments before their collapse. It didn't make sense. The Empire had erased all trace of the human species. Nothing should remain, certainly not an emblem of rebellion, not a symbol of resistance. The Empire had crushed them completely, hadn't they? Prepare the fleet. We're going to address this problem, Crix growled, his voice low and menacing. But I will not be humiliated. We strike now, no more games. The command room stirred as officers scrambled to their stations, preparing for what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. Yet, as the first steps were taken to launch the fleet, another transmission cut through the air. It was from the Warship. The screen flickered, and once again, that chilling, haunting voice broke through the static. This time, however, the voice was clearer, more direct. Empire, we see your preparations. Do not mistake our silence for submission. We do not seek war, but we will not be ignored. The galaxy has forgotten what it once knew, the cost of unchecked power, the price of dominance. You have built your empire on the bones of the innocent, on the ashes of those you have destroyed. Crix felt a cold chill creep down his spine, though he fought to keep his expression impassive. How could they know this? How could they possibly know the extent of the Empire's destruction? The last remnants of humanity were thought to have vanished long ago. So why were they now speaking as though they were the rightful heirs to the galaxy? You think us weak. You think you have the power to destroy us. But you are wrong, the voice continued, each word reverberating in Crix's ears, each one sharpening the uncertainty in his chest. You have forgotten who you face. You have forgotten what happens when you turn your back on the past. Remember. The screen went black, but the words lingered in the air like a haunting melody that refused to fade away. Remember. What was it that the humans wanted them to remember? Was it the destruction of their colonies? The fall of Earth? Or was there something else, a deeper, darker history they had hidden from the galaxy? What was that? Crix hissed, his voice trembling with the intensity of his fury. Explain it to me. The officers in the room looked at each other, unsure. General Vorn stepped forward, his face grim. Your Excellency, I believe they are trying to make us doubt everything we have built. They want us to question our strength, our control. They want us to look back, to remember the past and the cost of our rise to power. But it's a ploy, nothing more. Crix's mind was spinning. The Empire had not built itself by questioning its own history. They had moved forward relentlessly, crushing any opposition. They had left no room for doubt, no space for weakness. And now here was humanity, back from the dead, it seemed, trying to force them into an impossible position. A decision had to be made. A response had to come, and it had to come swiftly. Yet deep inside, Crix knew this was different. The humans were not asking for war. They were asking for acknowledgement. They wanted the Empire to remember who they were, and in doing so, to remind the Empire of the dangers that had once caused their downfall. But Crix was no fool. If they thought that the Empire would bend to their will, they were sorely mistaken. "We will not be intimidated," Crix declared, his voice low and filled with an authority that could not be questioned. "The galaxy is ours, and it will remain ours." But deep down, he knew that this wasn't just about power. This was about something far more dangerous. It was about legacy, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that humanity was not just returning. It was coming back to claim what had been stolen from them long ago. Crix's resolve hardened as he looked over the grand map of the galaxy displayed before him. The Empire, with its vast fleets and iron grip over the stars, had never faced a challenge quite like this. But he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when the Empire's very legacy was at stake. The humans were trying to stir doubt, to make the galaxy question everything they had fought for. But there was no room for doubt in Crix's mind. The Empire had defeated them once, and they would do so again. "We strike now," Crix declared, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Deploy the full fleet. The warship above Valara is the symbol of their arrogance, and we will destroy it, once and for all." The officers around him nodded, but there was a hesitation in their eyes. Even General Vorn, the ever-loyal commander, paused before responding. "Your Excellency, are you certain? We don't fully understand their capabilities yet. We saw what they did to our cruisers, the warship's technology. It's beyond anything we've encountered." Crix's eyes flashed with fury, but there was also something else there. A flicker of fear. He could feel it, deep in his gut. The unknown. The humans had come back from the dead, and now they were challenging the very foundation of the Empire. This wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight for survival. "I will not cower before them," Crix said, his voice growing cold. "They think they can shake us, make us second-guess our strength. We will show them the power of the Empire. We are the masters of this galaxy, and no one, not even the ghosts of humanity, will take that from us." But even as he spoke, he knew the choice he was making was risky. A gamble. If they were wrong, if they underestimated humanity's return, it could be the Empire's end. He had pushed all his chips to the center of the table, but he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The Imperial fleet moved into formation, the massive warships and battlecruisers assembling in tight clusters around Valara. The warship still hung motionless in the sky, an indomitable presence that towered over the planet. Its dark, foreboding silhouette seemed to pulse with quiet power. It had been waiting for this moment. Crix's eyes were locked on the fleet's progress as the first shots were fired. The powerful cannons of the Imperial fleet launched salvo after salvo of plasma and ion bursts towards the warship. The sky around Valara lit up with explosions, brilliant streaks of fire cutting through the blackness of space. The fleet's massive guns roared in unison, sending wave after wave of energy toward the enemy. But nothing happened. The warship didn't move. It didn't return fire. It didn't even make a sound. The first barrage of weapons impacted against its hull with a force that should have cracked any normal ship in half. But the warship didn't flinch. The energy bursts simply dissipated as though the ship's hull was absorbing them, leaving behind no sign of damage. The Imperial fleet, once so confident in their firepower, now looked like an army of ants trying to fight a giant. Crix's heart began to race. "Report! What's happening? Why isn't it reacting?" The communications officer turned to him, pale. "Your Excellency, it's like the warship has absorbed the fire. We're not even registering any damage. Our weapons, they're not penetrating its defenses." "What?" Crix hissed, his fury rising. "That can't be. Continue the bombardment." But even as he spoke, something changed. The warship's massive form began to move. Slowly, but with an elegance that belied its size, it shifted in space, its hull seeming to ripple as though it was slipping through dimensions. The Imperial fleet's weapon systems locked onto it, but it was almost as if the warship was no longer bound by the laws of physics that governed their own ships. It simply phased out of their targeting systems like a ghost. Then, in an instant, it was gone. One moment the warship was hovering ominously above Valara. The next, it had vanished. No thrusters, no energy signatures, no signs of movement. It was as though it had simply disappeared into thin air. A stunned silence fell over the Imperial fleet. What just happened?" General Vorn muttered, his voice barely audible. Crix stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the warship had been. His mind was reeling. He had ordered the full might of the Empire to crush them, and yet the humans, this ship, this impossible force, had outwitted them, outclassed them, and now it was gone, as if they had never been there at all. "Find them!" Crix barked, his voice desperate. "We can't let them get away. They're hiding somewhere. Search every corner of this system. We won't let them mock us." But the more they searched, the more the sense of futility spread. Hours passed, and still there was no trace of the warship. No sign of it, not even a hint of its presence. It was as if the ship had never existed in the first place. And then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, a transmission came through again. This time, it wasn't from the warship. It was a voice Crix recognized instantly, the same voice from before, the voice of the human emissary. But this time, it wasn't speaking from the ship. It was speaking directly into the Empire's communications channels. "Empire," the voice began, calm and cold. "You think you have won. You think your weapons, your power, will protect you, but you are wrong. You cannot fight what you do not understand." Crix's heart pounded in his chest as he listened. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here to destroy. We are here to remind you of the price of your arrogance. We have been watching you, and now we are here to make sure you never forget us again."